Check, 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 check.
Hey, how are you? I'm very well. Good? Yeah, since I saw you last. Have fun. Good work. Good work. You see the we had 3,000. So I thought rain, maybe 30. I would have been happy with 3,000. Yeah, but you know, I got rest up.
Welcome, everybody. So I want to welcome everybody tonight to our talk. For those who don't know me, my name is Rabbi Mark Katz. I'm the rabbi here at Temple Ner Tamid. And this is now, I think, the third time that we're having AG Platkin to our Bima, though you should know he's been in this room many times, being a religious school parent and part of the congregation. And the first time, it was interesting, when I first heard him, I was very impressed, but I didn't know him very well because he hadn't yet become part of our community. The second time, he happened to choose us to host a Hanukkah celebration here. And then tonight, he's going to be just addressing the current moment. And what I can say is, as I've gotten to know him over the course of not only his tenure here, he was actually the acting attorney general when he began here, not the attorney general. It took a little while for that to get finalized. I've gotten to know not only the job that he does as attorney general, but just the person that he is, the way that he carries himself with integrity, the way that he chooses battles and fights them fiercely, not afraid of political blowback. And, you know, I've done a little bit of writing and learning about integrity and what integrity means. And ultimately, integrity doesn't mean sticking to your values. Integrity means sticking to your values at cost, right? Because someone who sticks to their values and it doesn't really matter, that's not integrity. That is an accident that is fortuitous. Integrity ultimately means that there has to be some kind of blowback for the decisions you make. And one thing that I've really appreciated about AG Platkin is that he is a man of incredible integrity, who is willing to take stands that he knows are unpopular, that he knows are going to be a fight, but that ultimately he thinks are right. And he's going to be in conversation with our own Jim Axelrod. So Jim has been on this Bima, I would say, at least 10 times doing interviews throughout the course of our Temple Talks series. And he is just a thoughtful, compassionate, and always well-prepared interviewer, and somehow gets things out of the people up here that I don't understand how he does it. And so we're so blessed with the two of them. Now, this Temple Talk series could not happen without Carrie Shavat, and I just want to give it a round of applause to Carrie. Carrie's curated this series. He makes sure that we have thought leaders in the community talking about some of the most pressing issues, and he always brings just the most intelligent, thoughtful people to the Bima, and we're very blessed, Carrie, to have you in our community as well. So with that, I'm going to just turn the mic over. I'll be up a little bit later to ask a few questions. If we've got time, maybe you can ask a few later as well. And so without further ado, I introduce our two speakers.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out, and thank you, AG Platkin, so much for being here. I know I've done conversations with Phil Murphy, Andy Kim, Mikey Sherrill, Raz Baraka. I don't want to get into a compare-contrast game, but impressive crowd you have here, and not just because it's a home game.
Sorry to let you down.
No. This is very impressive. So thank you. Thanks for coming out. Before we get into all of what's in front of us and what all of the people in this room are in the process of digesting every morning, although I'm sure we all wake up and try not to scroll, I just wanted to ask you, how long have you been a member of this community, this congregation?
So we joined, by the way, I have to embarrass her because she's here, and it's so rare that she comes to listen to me talk, so I'll get critiqued tonight. My wife, Sophia, is here. We joined, who knows who's watching the kids? I promise you, let's hope they're still there when we get back. But we joined, I actually know when, it was a little over 2 years ago, and there were two principal reasons, as I joke with you, and I'll be brief. One is Carrie is a force of nature. How do you think these talks happen? You don't want to say no to Carrie, and Carrie we knew that we were in the market to join a new synagogue and that we had kids fast approaching religious school age. And he just doesn't stop. So finally, it was like, yeah, Carrie, I won't say what I said because, I'm on a bima, but I'll join. But the second more important reason was that we went through with Mark and with this whole community the attempted firebombing of this beautiful synagogue together. And it's a very weird thing to say you helped prosecute the case of an attempted firebombing of your own synagogue. But now I guess I can say that. And Mark was very gracious with his comments, but Mark is a special person to me and to our family and to this community. And it was really through that experience that I'd sort of been looking for a Jewish home since I left probably my home, 20 years ago. And finding this community here was really, it's been an incredibly, just the last couple of years, been an incredibly important part of our lives.
I want to underscore that Rabbi Katz, a very special leader in so many different ways. I'm curious, over the course of your career, you obviously never had a case prosecuting somebody for something that had such deep emotional meaning to you. How do you separate? Unlike the other cases, did you feel a conscious sense of needing to draw a line between head and heart as you were prosecuting?
So that case was interesting because it was actually charged federally, and it's a good example of what I hope continues, but I guess time will tell. We have in New Jersey a really strong history of federal-state partnerships. So that case, the case involving Near Tamid, my team was in lockstep with the FBI, with local police, with the attorney's office in Newark. I know we have some alums or folks from here who have worked there, and it was the best example of law enforcement working really well. It took us, Mark, less than 72 hours to bring those charges. And if you see how these cases come together, they're very complex, doing that kind of search based on relatively little evidence to bring very serious charges in a short period of time and bringing them in the best forum in coordination across. That's how you keep folks safe. And that's what we do every day. There always is a personal, even if I had no personal attachment, if cases that you see come across my desk or anybody's desk, they don't have some impact on you, then you probably should be in a different line of work. Because we're dealing with real people's lives, things that have devastated their lives, in this case, threatened an entire community. And it's what drives me. It's what motivates me. It's why I love the job, because whether the case is, I say big or small, to any individual, that case is the most important thing to them, and the way we treat them and the way we handle those cases and the way we deliver justice in this state is incredibly, incredibly impactful, both at the micro level and personally and for the broader state.
All right, so as the Attorney General for the state of New Jersey, you have a full plate to begin with. But recently, you've been walking point in pushing back against the White House in several high-profile areas. So let me just start out by asking you your sense. Are we, A, in a constitutional crisis? B, are we approaching a constitutional crisis? Or C, when you hear people throw that term around, do you think they're being overly dramatic?
Yeah, I think we are definitely in one. I think we've been in one. I think I said first publicly in February that we were in one. And what I mean, and I do think those term constitutional crisis, rule of law, democracy, they're fairly abstract. And to the average American, they don't necessarily understand what that means. In fact, I'm an attorney and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, but even during the campaign, we heard a lot about democracy and authoritarianism and whatever that may be. And even for me, it felt abstract. But, it doesn't feel abstract as we dealt with on the second week of the administration when our Medicaid system was frozen unlawfully based on some order that didn't like some definition that they can't even articulate of DEI, or kids who get dropped off at school at Head Start and don't know if those programs are going to exist, or as I received notice, the task force that takes on drug cartels, which is something I think this administration cares about, was frozen. Or if you're as has been openly discussed in the Oval Office, an American citizen concerned about being sent to a foreign torture chamber, which is what the prison in El Salvador is. It's not a prison, it is a torture chamber without apparent recourse, which is the administration's position at the United States Supreme Court once you're over there. I think that should scare everyone. And so what does it mean to me to be in a constitutional crisis? Well, look, there are many cases. I'm in court all the time. As a state, we are constantly in court. I have certainly disagreed with judicial decisions. If it's not a final decision, the way to deal with that is you appeal it. If it's a Supreme Court, you can express your disagreement with it, as I did, for instance, on Dobbs or Bruin or one of the case, some case. But we never once suggested we wouldn't follow it. Never. So early on in the administration, the Vice President of the United States, somebody who's my contemporary age-wise, who went to similar schools, I think I paid attention, I'm not sure he did, openly questioning whether they would follow courts. And that has been what this administration has done. Now, in our cases, we have, through sheer brute force, have gotten them to comply. But we're seeing in the Garcia case a real test. And I do think anytime an administration is openly questioning whether they will adhere to clear orders from the United States Supreme Court, if that doesn't meet the definition of a constitutional crisis, then I don't know what does.
So I think the full quote was you on the vice president. J.D. Vance did go to law school, but I don't think he paid any attention, because you learn on the first day of law school that courts decide what the law of this nation is. So in your view, is it not knowing the courts decide what the law of this nation is, or is it a deliberate choice to ignore the framework of our system of government?
I think the president, the vice president, the attorney general, senior officials understand the role courts have historically played in this country.
They just don't care?
I think there has been, there has been an attempt in the first, 90 some odd days of this administration to undermine the effectiveness or the legitimacy of a variety of institutions. We've seen it with respect to higher education. Sadly, we've seen it with respect to the media. As a lawyer, we've seen it with respect to the legal profession and the judiciary. They've threatened to impeach judges. They have threatened to disregard clear orders, and in some cases, they actually have disregarded clear orders of judges. They know that is not normal. Whether they are making a very cynical, in my view, bet that I hope is wrong, not just for the immediate, but for the country that my kids will inherit, that the public won't care. Because at the end of the day, the rule of law, constitutional rights, constitutional norms, as clear as they are on paper, they're really just principles that we all believe we should follow. The idea that the president will adhere to court orders, yes, it was articulated in Marbury versus Madison by the courts, but it's just been a principle that executives have generally, with few exceptions, followed throughout our nation's history. And once you start taking the toothpaste out of the tube on some of these core principles, not just sort of fringe issues, core democratic principles, it's very hard to put it back in.
Is there any historical precedent? Is there any historical corollary to what is going on now? Or is this an entirely unique moment in American history?
The answer, I think, is yes and no. I think if the question is, have we gone through difficult periods of time that have tested us as a nation? Of course, the answer to that is yes. We fought a civil war. We went through a Great Depression. We had Jim Crow. You know, we had slavery. You know, we've been through ugly periods in American history that have been difficult. But if the question is, have we dealt, certainly in modern American history, certainly post-Civil War, with a president who is so, and I say this, by the way, as somebody who has said very clearly, he's elected. He has broad powers. If you look 4 years ago, there's a lot of colleagues of mine in other states that question the legitimacy of a democratic election. I've never done that. I've never questioned that he has broad powers. He has majorities in both chambers in Congress. If he was willing to work through legal channels, even if I didn't agree with what he's doing, there's a lot that I probably wouldn't vote for in Congress. He can still do a lot of things as the president, but he can't rewrite constitutional principles overnight. He can't disregard clear obligations in law. He can't thumb his nose at constitutional protections. And I think the degree and the pace, most importantly, that we are seeing a president do that is unprecedented is scary, and folks should be alarmed, and we got to call it what it is.
So help me for a second understand what happens. I think a lot of people wake up, as we say, and wonder, is somebody going to do something about things they feel so strongly about? Take me behind the curtain for a second. I'm curious. You're 2 weeks in, first week in February, watching what's going on. Do the attorney generals start calling around to each other and figuring out a sort of a plan of pushback? Are you in contact constantly with counterparts in other states?
So this work started well before November 5th, certainly before January 20th. It started well over a year ago, actually, now. If there's one thing you have to hand to this administration, they are remarkably transparent in at least one respect. If you ever want to not sleep at night, read Project 2025. It's a 920-page document that, with the exception of probably Elon Musk, because I don't even think President Trump knows what Elon Musk is doing right now, essentially most, or if not all of the things they've done, they laid out in black and white on the campaign trail through the Project 2025 document. And so a little over a year ago, a number of us came together, and we being New Jersey, were one of the leaders of this effort, and said, we are not going to make the same mistake we made 8 years ago, which is people didn't really take it seriously. And the lesson of the first term for me was essentially what they said is what they did. What the president said is what he did. And so we took it seriously and we prepared. And so that's why at 8 p.m. on January 20th, when he signed just a blatantly unconstitutional executive order for the first time since the Civil War, 157 years since the 14th Amendment was ratified, he rewrote whether or not a child born on U.S. soil would be birthright citizen, would have citizenship by birthright. So the next morning, 11 a.m., we were on file. That doesn't happen by accident. And we'll be in the Supreme Court. We could talk about this on May 15th, arguing something I never thought I'd have to argue about whether your citizenship depends on which state you're born in. Same thing with the funding freeze. So the same thing with every case that followed. Essentially, we had preparation that took months because we took seriously the threat, and we took seriously not just the threat politically, but the threat to the residents of this state and to the residents of the states in the coalition that I'm proud to be a part of.
So a recent poll on birthright citizenship, a CNN poll, 56% of the people polled actually oppose the idea of ending it. They're in support of your position. 41% support the idea. Did any part of the political calculus of, hey, what of the very many issues we could pick are we going to sort of push out most prominently, have to do with the fact that the majority of people in this country actually agree with your interpretation of the 14th Amendment?
Look, there are rights enshrined in the Constitution and the state laws and in federal laws for a reason, and we do that not to protect people just based on whether or not they're in the majority. We do that specifically to protect people when they're not in the majority. And birthright citizenship, I mean, remember what caused the 14th Amendment to include a citizenship clause that says if you're born on U.S. soil. It was the 10-year period between Dred Scott and the end of the Civil War. And we fought a civil war to settle this question. We said because of how much debate there was about whether descendants of slaves were in fact citizens of this nation, that we were never going to have this debate again. And for 157 years, we didn't. And for 125 years or so, the Supreme Court has been quite clear that our interpretation is right. And so what the president did on the evening of January 20th, I think, was a very clear sign of things to come. It's not just about birthright citizenship, though it is. And on May 15th, what I was referencing is the Supreme Court is hearing whether or not the injunction that we have in place, meaning that the order that stopped the effectiveness of that illegal act, applies to states whose attorneys general did not join our suits. So a very real scenario. Now, North Jersey, less so because New York is part of our coalition, but Pennsylvania is not. So if you're a parent in South Jersey delivering a child and the Supreme Court says only states that join the suit are covered, well, if your child would be a birthright citizen in New Jersey thanks to the injunction, but your child's high risk and you decide to go to CHOP, that's what the Supreme Court's going to decide whether that child is. And it's not clear what they would be because the government didn't say what you are, it just says what you're not. It says you're not a citizen. So there'd be, for the first time in American history, this second-tier class of children, of babies. In New Jersey, it's about 6,000 a year, who would be in some other status. I mean, like, we can talk about the legal arguments and go back to the floor debates in the 1860s, but at some point we either are a country that's governed by there's no clearer statement in the Constitution than that people born on US soil are citizens. Again, because we had a civil war to settle it.
There is that thing about you can't run more than 2 times.
Yeah, I go, the Attorney General's still thinking about that one. Look, I think we're gonna see, we prepared and we're gonna continue to see efforts to undermine the rule of law in ways that are very scary. And so I don't think about it from a political lens. That's not my job. I think about it, are you hurting New Jersey residents and are you breaking the law? And if those answers to those 2 questions are yes, whether you're a big corporation, whether you're an individual committing crimes, or whether you're the President of the United States, I don't particularly care. I think I have an obligation to stand up for the people here.
I'm very curious listening to you because it touches on something I know we talk about in my house all the time, which is these are very important principles. So many people in this room are the children or grandchildren of immigrants. And these are deeply felt positions. But sometimes I wonder in this country, is it going to remain an abstract issue? Yes, you'll get upset, and yes, you'll yell at your phone as you're reading about it. But until your 401k is cut in half, there's not going to be any movement. A, I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, and B, how frustrating is that for you? Because clearly, you're deeply connected to these issues, but I wonder if you ever are mystified at the extent, I know we had a beautiful demonstration that Carrie was involved in organizing, 8,000 people in Brookdale Park, but do you wonder what it's going to take to have more people say, hey, what's going on? The birthright citizenship couldn't be clearer, couldn't be more important.
I think beyond even just birthright, look, New Jersey is the immigrant state. We're in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. We fought a Supreme Court case about who owns Ellis Island. Turns out it's both of us, New York and New Jersey. And we're a state with millions of immigrants. I mean, it's the way my family came here. It's the way my wife's family came here. It's the way just about all of our families came to the state. And the demonization of immigrants more broadly is something that we can't be mealy-mouthed about. Look, I'm the chief law enforcement officer of our state. I care deeply about public safety. And by the way, I'll put our record of public safety up against anybody else in the country. Lowest level of gun violence on record historically, 2 years running. Highest number of human trafficking cases brought in basically our state's history. Dramatic reductions in auto theft and burglaries, all things we've taken seriously. So trust me, I care about people's safety. It's my top concern. But the threat to public safety, you want to talk about the border? Fine. The threat to public safety is not the woman who is working as a home health aide, who has committed no crimes, who has been here for 25 years, who has paid taxes, who has raised American children. That is not the person who is threatening anyone's public safety. And those people have rights too. They have rights too. The Constitution gives them rights too. And if we are going to be in a place where it's just okay to say, I don't care who you are, American, un-American, student visa, undocumented, we treat everybody the same and we can throw you in a foreign prison because of the demonization that we've done to the immigrant community, then we're in a very dark place. And what I just described is not that far off from what's happening right now, or at least what the president is contemplating.
So how do you decide, you mentioned some issues, Head Start or Medicaid or food stamps, which affect everyone. How do you decide which issues that affect the residents of New Jersey to press forward on in terms of the administration? You got a whole wide range of things you can go with. I get the explanation on birthright citizenship, but how else are you going to determine which issues get your laser focus?
It's really those 2 questions that I referenced. It's, are you violating the law, and are you hurting the residents of New Jersey? And I know that sounds sort of like simplistic, but if you think about every case we filed, and we're batting 1,000, we have not lost a single one of the cases in New Jersey, meaning the cases that we've joined or led against this administration. which by the way is historically unprecedented. Typically, you're successful about 20% of the time that states sue the federal government. The first Trump administration, states suing the administration were successful about 80% of the time, which was unprecedented. I like to joke that's because they violated the law at an unprecedented rate. And this time, we're batting 1,000. We haven't lost a case. And so I think about those two questions. And again, the question to me is not whether I disagree with something at a policy level or politically. It's whether you're hurting the residents of New Jersey and violating the law. And every case we have filed, these haven't really been close questions. They have been clear violations of the law and clear harms to our residents. So that's how I think about each case. And I always feel like if I can explain each issue through those two lenses, then I can justify using my office, which is a taxpayer-funded law firm, to defend the people of the state. I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of this nation and the state. Same oath, by the way, the president swore. And you know, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to protect the residents of the state, regardless of who's trying to hurt them. And in this moment, unfortunately, it's hard to believe, but it's been the federal government that has been actively trying to hurt people in New Jersey.
In terms of withholding funding in areas, whether it's the NIH or universities that aren't getting money for diabetes research, ALS, whatever it is, where do you stand on the idea that this is something that should sort of be opposed? I had a very interesting conversation with someone yesterday. They said, you know what? Do I like him withholding money from Columbia University? No, but if that's going to be coercive in getting Columbia to do better on anti-Semitism, I'm okay with it. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, I care deeply about combating anti-Semitism. I think I would venture to guess most people in this room care deeply about combating anti-Semitism. I also care about not using combating anti-Semitism as a cover for doing things that are consistent with your political agenda. And look, I've said this, President has broad powers. Congress can do a lot. That's not the route they're going. So take NIH, which I think is like a super abstract thing to a lot of people. Raise your hand if you think people went to the polls in November because of the administrative fee cap in NIH grants. Like, that wasn't top of my list. I'm willing to bet it wasn't top of most people's list. But what would the upshot? By the way, an order announced on a Friday evening, coming into effect on a Monday. Okay, so just from sheer basic governmental planning purposes, not the way we should be running the Navy. Well, that order would have crippled, the first one, and several since, would have absolutely crippled our institutions of higher education, not just in New Jersey, not just in blue states, but in every state in America. And I've had conversations with Republican attorneys general who know it and who are hoping that we win. Now, I don't love that because I think they should stand up for us too, but here's what we need to remember. If they want to change things going forward, we may have a fight about that. But they can't yank funding away that has been either entered into in a contract or appropriated by Congress and signed into law, and that schools have received and started spending and relying upon without following proper legal process. And so we have stepped in to say, you can't cripple, in many states, it's not in New Jersey, though it's a significant employer, the largest employer in the state. You can't tell patients on clinical trials for Alzheimer's and cancer research that you're not going to get the treatments you deserve because the president doesn't like some DEI that he can't even define at a university, or because he wants to make vague assertions of you're not doing enough to combat anti-Semitism. There's a lot more we need to do to combat anti-Semitism in universities. The way to do it is not to cripple the institutions of higher education through illegal funding freezes or illegal conditions on their grants.
We have so much to get to, and I want to ask the rabbi if he has anything to add while we're talking about anti-Semitism. Do you have anything you want to kick in right now? Okay, let me ask you about big law firms. You have some experience in that world, and now you're viewing it obviously from sort of another side. First of all, just the notion of a number of New York City's biggest law firms, most successful, most powerful, best funded law firms folding and offering up 8, 9 figures worth of legal services. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I look, this is not a shot at anybody who works at those firms, and I certainly have friends at them. This is really scary. The ability for people to go to court and have their interests represented and challenge government, I say this as somebody who is routinely across the table from opposing counsel, is fundamental to our democratic system of government. It's fundamental to the rule of law. It does not exist. The rule of law does not exist without the adversarial system. And for this administration to essentially threaten clearly illegally unconstitutional ways lawyers and law firms for doing their jobs, threaten them with prosecution, threaten their entire business model for doing their jobs is, speaking of unprecedented, is scary, and is much bigger than any one particular firm. It's part of that overall effort. But this is where I will say, as a proud member of the legal industry, that I'm very proud to be a lawyer. I love being a lawyer. I've been disappointed by not just the firms that caved, but by the firms that haven't stood up for them. And that's not a criticism of any individual. I get the incentives. But you only had, I think, 8 or 10 of the largest 100 firms sign amicus briefs in support of the firms that are fighting. He hasn't issued 90 executive orders. So this idea of anticipatory compliance, where folks are just coming into compliance with these orders in advance, is scary. And if people, and this is real, because I know organizations that can't get counsel. On the way here from Trenton to Montclair, I had 3 different calls from nonprofits that are worried about them the administration going about their tax status. They don't know who's going to represent them. If people can't get representation in court, if they can't assert their interests and get recourse from the judiciary, then when the president and the administration does unlawful things, he's just going to get away with it. And that is not how our system of government was designed. So I think this is a moment, I'm not going to say anything here that I wouldn't say otherwise. I said this to the Washington Post this afternoon. I think this is a moment in time where a few years from now, maybe even not that long, lawyers are going to look back and say, did we stand for the principles that we said we would stand for when we first became a lawyer? I think this is really one of those look in the mirror moments. And I know that's hard. I know there's financial consequence. Trust me, I've had a few things said about me. But this is a watershed moment in our nation. And lawyers play a critical role, just like the media, who I think are really unfairly attacked, just like our universities. All of this is part and parcel of a similar attempt to stifle institutions that stand up and are independent.
So I was asking you about attorneys general in other states and the conversations that you may have with them. When you talk to either former colleagues or people you know who are with big firms that have decided, caved in your word, do you hear, can't believe we're doing this, but is there a sense of acknowledging the point you're making? Or is it more, you don't understand business, pal? Which is it?
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe I don't understand business. I've spent most of my career in public service. I think there's some acknowledging. Look, usually when I'm talking to them now, I'm trying to get them to come work with us. So, which, we are still hiring. But I understand, again, put in that position, I understand what firms are thinking. I'm just saying, I think this is a moment, and it's not just unique to law firms, where if you're being threatened, if you're being targeted, if you're facing clearly illegal acts, we need people to fight. Because candidly, I don't understand what these deals in any of these places mean. You're dealing with somebody who has shown that he will not honor a deal. You can't go to court and enforce the terms of that deal. Talk about almost $1 billion of free pro bono services delivered, apparently, as he said at a press conference, for things that he decides. And maybe that won't be how it plays out, but that is exactly what the administration has said, and publicly no one's disputed that. And so that really scares me, both as the chief law enforcement officer, as a resident, and as an attorney. And I don't think that is the way our system is supposed to work.
Let me ask you question about pardons. What did you make of President Biden's pardon of his son?
Well, look, I have some, as Rabbi said, the beauty of not being elected, I guess I can sort of just call it like I see it.
Please do.
I was very critical of that decision, and I understand. Sophia, I'll out you. Sorry, she didn't fully agree with me, and she was like, "You wouldn't pardon Robert if he did something," and I was like, "Not if he did something wrong. Gotta learn your lessons." And so I just tweeted that I understand the father concerned about his son. Every parent gets that, but I did think it sent a wrong message at a time when people have deep cynicism and distrust about whether government works for them, whether there's different systems depending on how connected you are. I thought I wasn't going to be the only one who said that for a while. I kind of was in New Jersey for a few days, and then sort of few other people came out. So that was not exactly how I expected it to go. But, look, I sued the Biden administration. I did say that about the pardon of Hunter, which I think was a really difficult thing for him personally. But I think we got to be consistent. And I think if we stand for the rule of law, then we have to be consistent about that. And we can't sort of pick and choose when we care, particularly when it comes to issues of corruption.
I want to ask you quickly before we get to the rabbi, and I also want to ask folks out here if you have any questions. But before we do, just one thing that caught my eye recently about something your office did, the lawsuit against Discord, which is a group chat that's all fun and games. I'm 900. That's how they advertise themselves. I don't know what Discord is. I'm 900 years old, but I would like to ask you to explain what about this chat group. I just think some parents would be interested, and why did that reach the level in your office of, we got to go after them?
So generally speaking, one of my priorities since I came in was holding social media accountable for the harms they've caused to kids. So we have led some of the largest lawsuits in this context. We've led the lawsuit against Meta, Instagram and Facebook for the harms they're causing kids. We've led similar lawsuit against TikTok. We are the only state that's sued Discord. Discord is, probably most of you don't know about it. I didn't know about it. It is because it's not targeted, no offense to you or me, it's targeted to kids under the age of 18 who play games. That's where it sort of started. It was the platform that was used to plan the Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville, Virginia back in 2017. This was the some good people on both sides rally. And it's been used as a criminal prosecutor. We can tell you, like, in a number of really bad and horrific cases, sharing child sexual abuse material, grooming, kidnapping. As recently as last week, there was a big kidnapping case in California where a 27-year-old lured a 10-year-old on Discord. But this is an example of why I love this job. So two things set that case off. We publicly announced an investigation almost 3 years ago after the top shooting at Buffalo, at the supermarket, where 10 black residents were shot and killed doing something so basic as going to the supermarket. That attack was reportedly planned and promoted on Discord. And so that drew our attention. The second thing was more local. I was talking to a friend of mine who had a 10-year-old who we found out was on Discord and was really concerned. And he was talking, I told this story at the press conference. He was talking not to me as the Attorney General, but as a parent who didn't know how he could protect his kid. And it just struck me. First of all, these companies are not supposed to be targeting kids under 13. That's clear in law. And they all want to say they're doing the right thing, because otherwise parents are going to let their kids on them. And so they make all these promises about what they're doing. In Discord's case, they promised that they were, keeping kids under the age of 13 off it, that they had these algorithms to track really bad content. All of it was a lie. And they knew it, and yet they peddled it anyway to make people feel like they were safe on a platform that was not safe. So we stepped in and we sued them. And I'm really proud that New Jersey is in a position now to lead some of these cases. I think just like with the tobacco industry, with attorneys general in the 90s, changed the tobacco industry. We no longer sell or market tobacco to kids in large part because of the suits the Attorney General filed. Opioid industry, where we took on an industry that was devastating, still is, but they're paying over $50 billion to account for it, devastating our communities. I think social media companies are the next big thing. And I will say this, and just so that it doesn't sound overly partisan, it's probably the best example right now of where we have broad bipartisan agreement amongst AGs. We had 50 states join us on the Meta and TikTok case. Now, we're the first state to sue Discord. I'm confident we're going to get some more based on the outreach that I've gotten over the last few days.
Just curious, have you seen the show Adolescence? Go home and watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Google it.
I feel like I'm learning that at home.
But it ties in very much to what you're talking
I will
about.
watch it.
With Discord. It's worth a watch. Rabbi, could you come on up? This discussion we were having where the AG was saying, don't use the cover of combating anti-Semitism to continue to, sort of work on getting an agenda. Don't allow it to be the cover for your agenda. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I very much struggle with one particular question, and I want to kick it over to you because I'm curious what you think about this. So there's a really famous quote that Nachmanides, who's like a medieval Jewish commentator, writes about the fact that you can be a navel b'Torah, which means basically you can be a scoundrel within the bounds of law. That sometimes things are technically legal, but it doesn't mean that they're ethical. And there's a line between legality and ethics. And I feel like I don't know the law well enough, you clearly do, to know whether some of the actions that are being taken, let's say of revoking student visas and things like that, are legal. I would love for you to reflect on the legality of those things, but I would also love for you to reflect on, if they technically are, how it is that you fight something that might technically be legal, but you might find is navel b'Torah, right? Unethical within the bounds of something that is legal itself.
It's a really good question. As always, you ask me something that I have to think really hard about. Whether what he's doing in a particular case is legal is hard to answer in a broad stroke. A lot of what he's doing I don't think is legal and is playing out in the courts, or at least the powers have not been asserted in this way. We have, I think, reportedly 12 students at Rutgers who had student visas that were revoked. Tufts case obviously drew a lot of attention. The video is fairly chilling, and my understanding of the facts is that she signed an editorial or an op-ed. Query whether that's consistent with the First Amendment. I want to say one thing because I don't want it to be lost. I do think our universities, in many respects, failed with respect to combating anti-Semitism. I do think anti-Semitism has been treated differently as a form of bias in this country. I think it's been we've talked about this, it's become a more acceptable form of bias. I think it's very real, and I think it's very scary, and I think candidly it exists on both ends of the ideological political spectrum, period. And I have taken strong action on that. And there are protections in law, which I issued guidance last year reminding our universities that under state and federal law, you have to provide safe places for students to learn. And so if students can't access their classrooms, if they can't access the library, if they can't access their learning environment because they're being targeted based on their identification as a member of a protected class, you're violating state and federal law. I sort of did that because I thought it would give the universities cover to do more, thinking like, oh, you thinly veil this threat of litigation, maybe they'll step out and do more. I was a little disappointed. I think some did, some passed the test and some didn't. And I think New Jersey was not the only place. In some cases, I think they clearly did not pass the test. That's a very different question than saying, should we be doing the types of things that we're doing? And I do think there's a debate on some of the issues about whether this administration or any administration can do legally what they're doing. And I think there probably are some things they can do that they have the authority to do, especially going forward. I mean, look, there's more they can do conditioning grants, passing new laws on future funding than when they're trying to revoke funding that's already been allocated and promised. That's just a basic legal principle. But I also question whether this is going to be the most effective way to combat something which you talked about in your sermon last High Holiday service, which is, unfortunately, anti-Semitism now. The levels of it have reached a point that, like, my grandparents didn't think we would see again. In fact, my 91-year-old grandma said that to me recently. And so there's going to be a legal fight about what he's doing. There is going to be a court of public opinion fight about what he's doing. But I also hope that the conversation about combating anti-Semitism doesn't get lost in and be subsumed by this debate, because I think it's related, and I think it's an important component about what the president is doing, and he is, in my view, clearly using it to justify other actions that he wants to take. Because I can tell you, if you go on my Twitter feed, you'll see a whole lot of alt-right tweets about me that are very clearly anti-Semitic. I haven't heard him complain about those. So I just hope that we can, as a country, both make sure that we're adhering to the rule of law, make sure that people aren't being harmed. We take something very seriously that we should take seriously, which is a rise in bias generally, and particularly a rise in anti-Semitism, but also not lose sight of the protections that we have in our Constitution. So I didn't directly answer your question, because I never know how to answer you in a way that will meet the standard, but I did my best.
I'm curious about just actions that, like, regular people can take if they're finding that there's not, that they're looking at the world, they're realizing that it's spinning out of control for them. I mean, I think we've talked about this before, that, we talked about this both in the post-October 7th world, but also after the firebombing. I was walking around and people were saying to me, wow, like, it must be so hard, especially in the post-October 7th world, to be a leader at this point. And I said, oh, are you kidding me? Like, I have something to do. Like, I actually have a community to take care of. Everybody else just has to kind of sit there wondering what they can do. And I feel like I'm now in their shoes, and you are in a position, which also I don't envy, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, of having lots of things to do. But I'm curious, from your standpoint, like, what is there for a synagogue to do, a regular person to do? And also, a corollary to that, I've actually found myself worried about retaliation in a way that I've never been worried about retaliation before. I'm very protective of our 501c3 status in a way that I've never been before. And it's because I'm living in a kind of fear that I don't think I ever had been living in before this moment.
Can I just ask you to characterize his fear? Do you feel like it's exactly on the money to be more concerned than he's ever been before?
Yeah, I've long since gotten out of the business of telling people that they should be less concerned about what this administration is going to do. I think they've done things that, notwithstanding the fact that they were transparent about it, I don't think anybody thought we would seriously see, I'll go back to the Garcia case, an administration arguing to the United States Supreme Court that they can send somebody into an El Salvadorian prison, again, torture chamber, and have no ability to bring them back. I don't think we thought that they would ever threaten to take away the tax-exempt status of Harvard University, the nation's oldest institution of higher education. So I can't say the fears are unfounded. Like I told you, just 3 calls on my way from an hour and 15-minute ride from Trenton to here from nonprofits, big nonprofits, that are terrified of this exact issue. And there's rumors every day that there's something that's going to drop. And sometimes I think it's deliberate that they put out the rumors so that people get scared. And the fear is powerful. But there's 2 things, and it goes back to our conversation with lawyers. The first is silence and indifference is what they're betting on. It's what everybody who has ever tried to assert this type of authoritarian control, which is what it is. I mean, people may not like me saying it, but that's what it is. It is not a respect for democratic principles or checks and balances or rule of law. Anybody who's ever tried to do that has bet that the public won't necessarily all come with them, but they're not going to rise up in enough numbers to make it hard. So, relatedly, one, not being silent, and two, strength in numbers. There are a lot of allies out there who are still being silent. Push them to say more. There's a reason why they're attacking organizers of protests, because they don't like protests, because protests send a message that people don't like what's happening. And so my job is to stand up for democratic principles and the rule of law and our residents in the courtroom, and we're doing that clearly, and we're going to keep doing that. But I said this from day one on birthright in every case. These fights are so fundamental that they're going to be fought in the court of law, but they're also going to be fought and probably determined in the court of public opinion. And you asked your very first question about a constitutional crisis. How does that get resolved? That's not for me to say. That's for the American people to say. If we get to a point where this administration gets an order from the Supreme Court where you have a 6-3 conservative majority and he's put several people on it, then it's going to be up to the people to say whether or not we care enough about our system of government to stand up to it. And I think the answer is going to be yes. I really do. So I'll be that optimistic because I've seen enough to suggest. I mean, I was in Minnesota and 2,000 people came to an event that I did. I mean, like, I'm shocked when, 10 of you want to hear what I have to say. So I think people are really upset and people are really angry and they're fearful. And the best way to combat anger and despair and fear is to band together and make your voice heard. And so I think it's really that simple.
Do you think people care enough about the democratic principles that you're talking about here? I mean, I was talking to somebody recently that said, and I think they might be right, that the only thing that is going to cause people to care about democratic principles is if the economy tanks. If their stock market's doing really well, if they've got jobs, if things are really good for them economically, like democracy, schmocracy. And I wonder how true that really is for the average person. I care. I imagine that many of the people here care. That's why they're here tonight. But I'm curious, actually, whether you think the average American actually cares about the principles that you care about.
I will always have faith that people will do the right thing in challenging moments. I just have to maintain that. I don't know how I'd continue doing my work if I felt otherwise. And I think, look, you could look at some of the polls. I mean, the vast majority of Americans believe the administration should follow court orders. Now, whether that's their top issue, whether they'll show up in the streets, I don't know. But I do think the public believes that. I don't think people went to the polls in November to vote for mass deportations, potentially of American citizens to foreign torture chambers. I just don't believe that to be the case. I don't believe that to be what the American public said. And I don't think it's legal or consistent with the Constitution anyway. But again, it won't be up to me. It'll be up to millions of people. We talked about what was happening in Tel Aviv, before 10/7. And I think there's a lot of corollaries to that. I mean, obviously, nuances in situation, but the public showed their opposition quite visibly. We saw it in South Korea. And so, if we get, and I think we're pretty close, if we get to that point, it will be up, I think, to basically two things. It'll be up to, we'll see what Congress does. Like, will they ever, put aside whether you agree with them or not, they've essentially, Article 1, the article establishes Congress, they've essentially just let that be run roughshod over by this administration. At some point, maybe they assert their institutional authority, but I think they probably do that when they feel the public pressure that people care enough. And maybe it is the economy, maybe it's something else, but I will continue to believe that people believe in this country in rights. I think that's been our nation's history, and ultimately it'll be up to the public to decide whether I'm right.
These conversations always go so fast. I don't want to end the night without at least taking a couple of questions, if that's okay. We'll run the clock out.
I'll bring, you can call, I'll bring this, but
Okay.
the rule is your question has to end in a question mark.
This gentleman right here with the blue sweatshirt.
We learned the hard way over the last few years how when someone can gum things up in the court, sometimes it doesn't quite see the light of day in enough time. It slows down. Are there things that government, like yours, or things that we can do to gum up the works, to make it so that things move very slowly and are not able to come to fruition?
Yeah, and look, this might be where I'm not elected. My job, as I've said, is to protect people. Like I don't take the view that my job is to obstruct or resist. I've never said that. It's to protect people, and sometimes it means slowing down the harm. So that is the purpose of an injunction, especially a preliminary injunction, where you go in. And by the way, it's really, really hard for those of you who are non-lawyers to get something called a temporary restraining order against the federal government. It is a very high burden. In the first 2 months, we got 7. That's before you get a preliminary injunction, which also is hard to get against the federal government. And what does that mean? To your question, it means that trillions, literally trillions of dollars of spending that was unconstitutionally, unlawfully frozen had to be spent. And in a I'll give you a very practical sense of how that plays out. So, we had to go back to court. This particular case was in Rhode Island. And there were various programs that we were getting calls, said, hey, Matt, they're still freezing what they said they weren't freezing. So we've gone to court multiple times. And interestingly, the Department of Justice and the agencies have actually realized that they're wrong and opened the spigots. So there are literally spending programs that are coming into New Jersey today because not just we got the initial order, but that we went back and sort of said, you're going to comply with this. So we'll keep doing that. The second thing I think litigation and lawsuits do is I'll defer to you on what actually works in the media context, because that's not my lane. But
God, if I know.
but lawsuits break through. They're dramatic in some way, shape, or form, and especially when it gets to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is taking things. The birthright citizenship case was not something in normal times at this posture of the case that would get to the Supreme Court. They're taking it, and they're having argument on it. So there's going to be coverage of it, and there's going to be a fair amount of drama to that. And it will raise public awareness to some degree. How much, I couldn't say. But I do think our litigations matter both as a tool of educating, but also as a tool of preventing harms, most importantly, which is the primary concern.
We can take one from this side of the room in the back there with the stripes.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I have been wondering, I would really like to know your thoughts on IRA. I'm wondering if you feel like the laws that we currently have in place around discrimination have been sufficient enough to prosecute cases of anti-Semitism, or do you think that something like IRA would be helpful or maybe even necessary given what we're facing right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to disappoint you on the direct question because it's a live legislative issue, and I have obligations to not weigh in on live legislation from the government.
Maybe define it for people who don't know.
Yeah, so there's a debate about defining anti-Semitism in statute, and there's strong views on both sides of it. There's free speech concerns, and then there's obviously concerns that I think most of us share, regardless of where you come down on the bill, about having the tools to combat anti-Semitism. I will say from my perspective, just on whether we have sufficient tools, look, you can always use more tools in law enforcement. We advocate for them all the time, but I will say we have the strongest civil rights statutes and protections of any at a state level of any state in the country. I don't know where Trish is. Oh, there you are, hiding in the corner. So Trish Perlmutter, who works with us in Division on Civil Rights, we enforce the state civil rights statute. The law against discrimination is the oldest and strongest state civil rights statute. It covers a whole range of protected conduct, and we use it all the time, including to combat bias incidents involving a whole range of people and religions, but certainly anti-Semitism. We've invested in it. We've invested in bias crime work. We've invested in civil enforcement work. We put all that. We created a portal. You can go on our website. You can see basically where every bias incident reported is coming in. By the way, 1 in 4, which should scare anyone who's a parent here, 1 in 4 are coming in from schools. It's the #1 place that we receive bias incidents, K through 12 and institutions of higher education, which goes to my point earlier about how, notwithstanding my concerns, I do think schools have failed in a lot of respects to address rising bias generally. We've launched a anti-bias campaign, No Hate in the Garden State, which has a marketing component, but also has a stakeholder engagement where we're trying to get trusted voices out to build confidence in our reporting systems. I tell you all this because at a time when, for the first time in its 155-year history, the Department of Justice has gotten out of the civil rights protection business. The Department of Justice was created to combat racism in the South and the Ku Klux Klan in the wake of the Civil War. They've said very clearly civil rights work is not going to be their priority. It's important that you have strong state institutions and state laws to do it. Now, that's true in New Jersey, but it may not be true in every other state. And so I think it's a very important debate. I think there are legitimate views from people of good faith on both sides of that bill. And I don't know where it will shake out in the legislative process, but I know we have invested as much as any state in the country in putting resources to bear to stop bias incidents and certainly to prosecute bias crimes. And one thing that I think is important for folks to know, in New Jersey, no matter how you report an incident, because of the way we're structured, which is unique, every single case that's reported, whether it goes to law enforcement, whether it goes to our website, whether it comes to my office, wherever you call, within 24 hours, a team in my department looks at it, criminally, civilly, and then to identify trends so that we can hopefully, if we see problematic trends emerging, deploy resources to stop it.
All right, so I'm going to ask the last question. And I've developed somewhat of a facility over the years for being able to read thought bubbles over people's heads. So the thought bubble that I see the most is, and check me on my math here, but in 2029, the next gubernatorial election, you're going to be 43. Is that right?
I have no idea.
You will be. You'll be 43 in 2029. Still a young man. You gonna run for? Yeah, you gonna run for governor?
It's been great being with you all.
Yeah.
Look, genuinely, this is the greatest job I think I'll ever have. And for me, I've tried, as Rabbi said, I've tried to approach this job in a way that I can sleep well at night knowing that I've done what I thought was right. And that has not always been popular in Trenton, I will tell you. The knives that you can see coming out of my back might prove it. But I think, and it's upset Democrats and it's upset Republicans. And so, no, my focus is on, I have 9 months left in this job. I love it. I love it in this moment, as hard as it is, because like Rabbi Katz said, being able to stand up, frankly, for you all, for my kids, I love this state. It's like the only, other than my 7 years in California, it's the only state I've known, and it's a privilege. And so, forgive me for dodging, but I cannot. And Zoe is here would tell you, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. So the idea that I know what I'm going to be doing in 2029, but I am very proud of our record. I'm proud that we've stood up against corruption. I'm proud that we've stood up to this administration at a time when folks need it. I'm proud that we've cut gun violence to historically low levels. I'm proud that we stood up against social media companies. I'm proud that we've taken on human trafficking. I can go on and on. And I'm going to keep doing that work.
And not just a dodge, an artful dodge. And because this is a home game, we're going to leave it right there. But I would like to thank Rabbi Katz for, as you say, you have a community to take care of, and you take care of it so well. And I'd like to thank AG Platkin for being here tonight. It is such a blessing to have you as a member of this community, but it's wonderful to listen to you as the Attorney General of New Jersey. Thank you.
Yes, and I'll add my thanks to Matt. Jim, thank you. Carrie, thank you again. Just so you know, even though we're past Passover, it's actually quite a busy season in the Jewish calendar. I just want to give 2 plugs for events. On Wednesday night, it's our community's Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance commemoration ceremony. We switch off between a synagogue and another house of worship, usually a church, every other year. This year it's at the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House. It's at 7 p.m. on Wednesday night. The speakers are actually going to be 3 third-generation survivors, meaning grandchildren of survivors, reflecting on their grandparents' stories and ultimately what it means to be a grandchild of a survivor. And then on Sunday, I just want to give a plug, in the afternoon from 4:30 to 6:30, we're going to be celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut. A huge part of my mandate as a rabbi is to bring complex conversations to Israel and really unpack all the complexities. But I truly believe for one day a year, you can throw that stuff to the wind and just say, it is pretty miraculous that Israel exists, and you can have a party. And so we're going to do that on Sunday. And check your email if you're part of our community. If you're not, check our website for many other complex conversations as well. But come, eat some Israeli food, dance to some Israeli music, and be together on Sunday. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Sure. You in the middle?
I did not put him up that quick. I don't believe you for a second.